right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to A Conversation That Heals. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight, we have a special guest, author Tim Wortham Jr., who is the author of Daddy Issues. Last night, we had a conversation about daddy issues, but tonight we want to talk to the author of the book, Daddy Issues. We are excited. Tim is a author, he's a musician, he's a songwriter. He is the father of six. He deserves an award for that. He's the father of six. And first thing, he is the husband of one wife. He's the father of six, and he is the grandfather of two. In addition to that, he has several degrees. He is an incredible gentleman, and we're just excited about this conversation. I'm excited that he agreed to have this conversation, a much needed conversation. So we're going to dive in. As is our custom, we're going to open up with a word of prayer, then we're going to go right into the conversation. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this day and for this opportunity. Thank you for the gift of now. Thank you for the gift of the present. I thank you for life. I thank you for health. I thank you for strength. Thank you for this moment for two men to share and have conversation about issues that are affecting us. I pray most importantly that you will get glory out of this. I pray that lives will be impacted, inspired, and changed. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So again, everybody, welcome to A Conversation That Heals. We have author Tim Wortham Jr. tonight, who's going to share with us, and we're going to engage in some good dialogue. So Tim, say hi to the people and tell them a little bit about yourself, which I didn't do.
Yeah, you covered it very nicely. Hello, everyone. Tim Wortham Jr., born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. All I can say is I am very happy to be here tonight. I think that this is a very necessary conversation, one that's not happening enough in our community. And thank you so much for having me, Barry. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. My pleasure. So let's hop right in. So let me ask you this question. How do you define daddy issues?
So it's funny because I feel like the term is a bit more broad than it's often used to kind of describe rather. I think the daddy issues are any number of uh, effects or impacts of the absence of a father, or at times the
Mm,
unhealthy presence of a father.
wow. Wow. Okay. So let's dive into that a little bit more. How are, we were talking earlier before we got on about, the 70s and 80s kind of dating ourselves. So how are daddy issues different now than they were 30 or 40 years ago?
Uh, I don't know that the issues themselves are very different, but I
Mhm.
think now the ability to openly discuss them is present. Whereas 30, 40 years ago, everything was, you don't tell family business.
Right.
Things were very much kept in house, dealt with in house, or swept under the rug, or hidden, or whatever, covered up. And now we have these spaces, these platforms, and these venues where we can initiate conversation and invite folks in who it's not about them not having the opportunity, but sometimes they just lack the ability to initiate.
Wow, that's good. So you just kind of struck a chord because one of my pet peeves with our community is that family secret dynamic. We will protect our image even if what's happening in the family context is negatively impacting members of the family. So how do we change that narrative?
I think what we're doing right now helps change that narrative. I think someone being brave enough to say, "Listen, I've been through this," because I think one of the difficulties is convincing yourself that you're not the only one. You're not the first one. This is something that countless number of other folks have dealt with and have overcome.
Yes,
So
sir.
when we can kind of get to that point, then we transition from this space of hopelessness to a place of hope.
That's good. That's good. So as we mentioned earlier, you wrote the book Daddy Issues. What drove you or what compelled you to write that book?
So I was having it really came from a series of conversations I was having with some friends, some of my male friends, and just these recurring themes, these things that came up. We shared some similarities in our stories regarding our fathers and their presence, absence, what have you. And I felt like I had something to share that could help someone else.
That's
So
good.
this was, I mean, this was not at all, the type of book that you write to make a name for yourself, right? Because I in no way paint myself as some kind of hero. I'm very honest and transparent about the missteps that I've made, because the truth of the matter is I'm not the first or the last to have these issues, but I can guarantee you there are others who dealt with it in much more healthy ways, in ways that did not compromise their integrity and things like that. And so this was truly written based on a commitment to help others heal. And that's it.
Well, as I mentioned to you, I've started reading the book and it's an incredible piece of work. So I'm excited about getting more into it. And I think you did an incredible job. And I think the book will do just that. So I'm excited to see how the book will change lives. So again, thank you for having the courage to share as you did, as openly as you did, because I recognize that it is difficult for men to share. We're trained and we're groomed to be closed books, and our emotional portfolio, if you will, is very limited. We can only share or divulge so much of our emotional self. So to do that, I'm sure you went through a gambit of emotions. So as you were writing that, what were some of your experiences, as you had to revisit some of those moments in your life?
Well, first, I think I want to add something that you and I touched on a bit as we were preparing to go live. I feel like when books of this sort are presented, they are very academic. There's language used that you kind of got to look things up and you got to figure things out. And I
Yeah.
wanted to be very intentional about making a book that you could just read and relate to, and it feel like it's speaking your language. We can't have a conversation in our community if we don't use the language of our community.
Wow.
And so that was a
Wow.
very intentional decision for me. And as I started the process, I was writing on my commute to and from work. I would take the train up to Philly and back. And when I would normally, catch up on some Netflix or play a game or listen to music, instead I was just writing, just a paragraph at a time. I started with an outline of chapter titles, and I think what I started was like 15 chapter titles, and it ultimately became, I believe, 32 chapters in the book. And it was a heavy process. I'm going to be honest. It was hard to recount and recall some of those experiences, and not just the experiences, but to place myself there enough that I could again become familiar with how I felt there.
Yeah.
Because more than just telling what happened, I thought it was important to share how I felt, how it
Yeah.
made me feel, and the impact that it had on me psychologically, physiologically. And so, you know, the story is more than just the facts; it's also the feel, right? And
Yeah.
so it was a tough process. It was one where every so often I had to ask, "Am I going to finish?" And then when I finished, I had to ask, "Am I actually going to share this?" Because it's so
Wow.
vulnerable, it's so intimate, it's
Wow.
it's so personal.
It
But
is.
again, it came back to that commitment to the healing of others. So
But it was tastefully done. You shared some very personal moments and personal experiences, but it was tastefully done. So I want to applaud you for that. It's par excellent from my perspective. It's par excellent. Not that my opinion really matters, but it's par excellent. And I mean
it
that.
does matter, and I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. So let me ask you this: how did of course, people read your book, but I want to ask you, how did your daddy issues? What were your daddy issues? Let's start there.
So the big thing that happened, and you know because you've passed this part of the book already, is just that fear of abandonment.
Hmm.
When someone leaves your life who you never expect to leave, especially at such a young age, you have no way of knowing why.
Yeah.
And so you have no way of controlling whether that happens again or whether that happens repeatedly. And so something as simple as your mother dropping you off at school, which is just super routine to anyone else, is like so traumatic because you're like, all right, but is she going to come back and pick me up?
Wow.
Or is she going to be there when I get home? And so
Wow.
I think that was like the springboard, or that was like the core of all the kind of tentacles that grew out from there.
Wow. Wow. You you talked in the book, you when you were, I think you were maybe 3 or 4. and you snuck out of the daycare and you went to your mother's job. And I had this image of this little boy running through traffic, and I'm like, this is crazy. And I just thought about what could drive a person to that. So, this month is PTSD Awareness Month. And so as we examine that, you may not have been, and kudos to your mother who had the courage to seek out help, during the time where that wasn't done, in particular in our community. So kudos to your mother for having the wherewithal to think beyond how she felt and what others may think to seek counseling. Now, I'm assuming that your background is more Pentecostal.
Yes.
Okay, so in the Pentecostal, more charismatic movement, we pray about those things. We don't,
everything.
Right. So,
everything.
And I'm not dumbing that down. I'm not dumbing that down. I believe wholeheartedly in the power of prayer, but I believe as I said, there's a difference between demonic possession and emotional oppression. So I think though there's some things that we have to work through beyond just laying hands on me and praying for me. But in this whole idea of PTSD, some of the things you talked about in your book, for instance, your need for affirmation, your need for acceptance, your anxiety, those are symptoms of PTSD. Would you say that you suffered from that?
And it's funny, I never thought in those terms, but now I would have to say yes. I mean, obviously at the time, I was not even familiar with those terms, right? So I wouldn't have been able to kind of make that connection. But even as I was writing the book, that the whole idea of PTSD never crossed my mind. So it's amazing that you would bring that up now. And yeah, I would have to say yes, because there were absolute triggers. There were things that would just kind of set me off and kind of get me off kilter. And wow, yeah.
So when you do your next edition of this book, you have to add that in there.
How about it?
So how are those daddy issues impacting you now, or have you reconciled with them?
So I will say that I have progressed beyond most of the residual effects, but not all. Right. So I still have, moments where I wonder. I think part of it is because I render service, right? So I'm a musician, I'm a creative, and so there will always be this question of who really likes me,
wow,
versus who really likes what I do, what I can provide. And so there's always this feeling of, all right, in this space, am I a person or a commodity?
Wow.
And that is something that is very difficult to navigate for someone who has historically just longed to be validated and seen as a person with value.
Wow.
So maybe there is value being ascribed in my direction, but that question, not knowing for sure if it's being pointed at me or what I'm producing is still a bit of a struggle at times.
You said something else in the book that was really potent. You said that you were never the star. You were the one who was always beside the star. And so I think for me, a star is somebody who shines, not necessarily celebrity status, but it's somebody that shines. And I think, your work shines. But I think, as I read through your story, there was, and you said it in no uncertain terms, that there was an inferiority complex.
Absolutely.
You never felt like you were good enough. And I want to trace that back to something I've been wrestling with for maybe a year now. I believe that the role of a father is fivefold. It's procreator. I think we talked about this earlier. Procreator, provider, protector, parent, and priest. The priestly role of the father tells the child who they are. So if the priest never shows up in the father, whether the father is there or not, that child is left to figure out who they are. And so they have to figure out, so in your case, fortunately, you saw positive images. You looked at Bill Cosby, you looked at the guy from Silver Spoons. You saw these positive images, But what about now, where we have a generation of young men who didn't experience a priest? First of all, their father procreated and left, so they don't even know what it is like to be provided for or protected, let alone to experience their father as a priest. So now they're left with television images to tell them who they are, or to try to frame who they are. So in that context, how are daddy images, or daddy issues rather, impacting our community?
Yeah, and that is a scary, scary thought when I look at, the images that are on television now, and thinking
Mm,
of the impact, when I was coming up, and I covered it, I had images that I could literally aspire to. These were
yeah,
fictional characters, but what they presented was wholesome. It was productive. It was, they were professionals and they were intellectuals. And it drove me to pursue something better than anything that I was seeing in my reality.
yeah,
And now art is basically glorifying a stereotypical reality. And so not only is it not better than what I'm seeing, in most instances, it's worse. And so
yeah,
when our children are turning to media and it's becoming, their role model, their aspirational goals, then they are not aspiring in an upward trajectory. They're actually aspiring downward.
yeah,
And that is devastating to realize. And that's why it is so important for us as men to be available to those who don't have, those who are
yeah,
lacking. You know what I mean?
yeah.
You talked earlier about me being a father of six and a grandfather of two. Well, that sixth, the eldest, is actually my goddaughter, but we scratched the god part, and
Okay.
she has been ingrained into our family. And she didn't join us until she was a teenager already, but she had that need. And so to have the ability to fill that need as someone who wanted nothing from her, someone who only wanted the best from her, to see her then um, finish high school and not become a statistic, go on and earn a degree, now become a mother and a wife and an entrepreneur, that is our
Wow.
obligation to one another.
Yeah. That's so powerful. That's so powerful. So have there been other, in addition to, how many sons do you have?
I have two sons.
Two sons. Okay. So in addition to your sons, have you also mentored other men?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so being a musician in church, many boys kind of gravitate to music. Oftentimes it's drums, and I'm playing keys. But every now and again, you get some folks who are actually interested in keys, and I just make sure, number one, because when I was starting out, there were very few who did that for me, who kind of were
Mm,
willing to take me under their wing, show me a thing or two, because they were more concerned about keeping their hold on their spot. They couldn't have anyone become as good as them and become a threat,
right.
right?
Right.
I don't have a spot. So I'm not concerned about keeping a spot. I am concerned about making sure that, you know, I see myself as just a conduit, right? I'm not meant to house anything. I'm meant for things to pass through me. And
Mm.
so whatever I'm gifted with it with the goal of making sure that it doesn't die when I die.
That's so good. That's so good. You know, Miles Monroe had a philosophy, and I agree with it, that the real testimony or testament of a leader's success is that they have a successor.
Yes, I
So
agree.
the goal is not to build a dynasty. The goal is for continuity of whatever your
Yes,
enterprise is.
yes, yes.
So that's powerful. So in terms of working with men other than your children, or boys or young men, what have been some of the barriers that you've had to work through?
Uh, some of the barriers have really been time and space.
Hmm.
So I served at a church in New Jersey. I was living in Delaware. I now serve at a church in Philadelphia. I still live in Delaware. So it's not like the young people that I'm really engaging, I'm I'm like right around the corner from, where at a moment's notice I could just say, "Yo, what you doing? Let's go over to the park. Let's shoot some hoops. Let's
Right, right.
you know what I mean?" And so there are other influences that are getting a lot more face time than I
Mm. Wow.
am. And so there are, uh, far more hours being spent with folks who are like, it's just weed, man. It's nothing. Like it's no big deal. It's just this. It's just that. That word "just" it has a way of minimizing what the true consequences are. And if
Yes,
we
sir.
know anything about brain development, like these are kids when they're 14, 15, 16 years old, they haven't even yet matured to the point where they can fully comprehend consequence.
Right.
They're
Right.
they're not they're literally not yet capable. As much as we as parents, get frustrated and like to believe that they should be smart, you should be smarter than that. No, actually, their brains are still literally still developing. They got a couple more years before they can fully comprehend the gravity and the weight of the things that they're doing and the decisions that they're making.
There is some scientific data that suggests that that doesn't really happen until the person is in their 20s.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's a challenge. But let me ask you this. Have you noticed that when you do have those moments with those young people, those young men, that they almost become like sponges? They lock eyes with you because they've been waiting for a voice like yours.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also see those moments where, they're sometimes hesitant to 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 kind of approach because they're like, I don't want you to be disappointed.
Mm,
I know that I know you expect more from me than what I'm doing right now. And what I've come to find out is that's a good thing.
yeah.
They could be messing up, that's fine. But they have that consciousness within them that says, somebody knows that I'm better than this.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so even if they have some years of rebellion, even if they have some years where they're just making bad decision after bad decision, that seed remains.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And that
Yes, sir.
matters, man. That matters.
It does. And I shared this with Frederick last night, but on Mother's Day we buried my godmother, one of three godmothers, but this godmother was significant because she was the one that warred for me when I was backslidden.
Wow.
And when people told her, you should give up on him, she was the one. I can't give up on him because I made God a promise. And so even though, and I remember years when there were times when I was rebellious and wouldn't receive what she was saying, but now 20 years later, those seeds remain. So our responsibility is not to police the seeds. Our responsibility is to sow the seed.
That's it.
So that is so powerful. So let me ask you this. How do your experiences with your daddy issues inform the way that you now parent?
So it's funny because that has evolved. You haven't gotten there yet. Keep reading. But that has evolved because early on, it actually made me um, not a great parent because
Hmm.
I overcompensated.
Hmm.
I overcompensated, and so I've had to almost about face and try to, you're like, I want my kids to have all the things I didn't have. I want this, and I want to make sure this, and I want to make sure this. And what I forgot was, in my lack, I learned a work ethic.
Yeah.
I valued things more. There were things that were learned not necessarily intentionally, but they were great lessons. And so my determination to be better than my dad was actually counterproductive at times because
Hmm.
instead of my kids earning rewards, oftentimes they were just getting them. Chores weren't done. They weren't, doing things that were expected of them, and still they got this, they got that, they got that. And I was reckless with spending. I had poor spending habits. I was maxing out credit cards because no, my kid's gonna have a vacation this year. We going to Disney. We
Wow.
doing this. You know what I mean? And so that drive in me to be better than my father caused me to make some very poor decisions early on in fatherhood. Thank God I have matured beyond that now. Now I understand that the better that I am aspiring to is not about what I give monetarily, it is about what I
Yeah.
give in presence. And
Yes,
so I
sir.
don't miss recitals. I don't miss award ceremonies. I take kids to doctor's appointments and dental appointments. Um, I'm there. We have conversations. I'm intentional about Sometimes we all go out, but also there's a day where I take this kid with me. It's just the two of us. There's a day to take the next kid, and it's just the two. Everybody gets their individual time because every one of them is an individual. They all need
Wow.
something from me a little different that I
Yeah.
can't give them as a group. I can only give it to them one on one.
The one that is a gift to be able to reach a child where they are, as opposed to, because we all have our own personal framework. And so we expect people in any relationship, we expect them to conform to our particular framework with not realizing that they are individual with individual needs. So I think that's a powerful tool that you have in terms of being able to reach every child as an individual. That's important. I respect that. Um, in terms of let me say something in the book you wrote, because it just sparked it when you were on the porch waiting for your uncle. He promised he was going to come back and get you, and when he came back they had already been to the beach and they left you. What do you do to make sure that nobody in your purview experiences that?
So first, I can only make sure that they don't experience it from me,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so it's just a matter of, I know we always strive for our word to mean something,
Mm-hmm.
but we also have to mature to the place that we're not overcommitted.
Yeah.
So I can minimize the I can't guarantee that I never break my word or I never fail to show up because life happens, circumstances
Right.
outside of my control happen. But I can minimize the likelihood that that will occur if I'm honest about my bandwidth.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So
sir.
that takes a level of self-awareness and honesty. And sometimes for those of us who have been disappointed so often, we take on the mantle of superhero. And so we try to do
Mm,
whatever we can for as many as we can, but we can't. It's impossible. It's
yeah,
impossible to meet every single need. And so
very
there's got to
true.
be a time I got to be able to say, so Barry, we got this guy at the church, man, who's trying to get ready for his prom, but I got another young man who has a big game tonight. I can't do both. Can you take one of those for me? Right? We got to be able to have this network of folks where I might not be able to make it, but I can help make sure that somebody's going to be there when you need them.
Yeah. And I think we had it was very informal, but we had that growing up. Very
Yeah,
informal, very loose, but we had some semblance of that, to
absolutely.
some degree. I think that's important. How do you want to be remembered by your children?
So I I want them to remember that when I was around, we had fun.
Hmm.
We had fun.
Mm-hmm.
Life is, especially right now with the access that our kids have to information. Like I remember having to sit my kids down and have this conversation about George Floyd and all the stuff that was going on, and to hear how informed my 10-year-old at the time was, it was kind of heartbreaking to me because I'm like, at 10, she should just be worried about her dolls. She should just be worried about whatever she's into as a 10-year-old. She
Right.
shouldn't be thinking about, the gravity of this moment. And God knows she shouldn't have this level of understanding about what this moment means and what it's all about. And so
Wow.
when I'm able to come in and just kind of lighten the mood for them and lighten the space for them, obviously I want them to remember the advice that I give. I want them to remember that I was present. But in a world that is filled with just so much heavy content, I
Mm,
want them to remember that, you know what, Dad made sure that we always had fun.
wow. Wow. So you just said something, and I want to detour for a moment. You talked about the heavy content. How did you grow beyond your daddy issues? This wasn't one of the questions, but I have to ask it. How did you grow beyond them?
So honestly, it it did not happen until I finally got to know me.
Mm.
And when I finally stopped um, defining my value by the things I could do, the things I could provide, and started to see that I am my value. Like who
Yes,
I
sir.
am is the value. That's what's worthy. That's what's worth something. It's who I am as a person. And so if I'm broke, I'm still valuable.
Yeah.
You know, if every musician in the room is a better musician than me, I'm still valuable. You know, if every teacher is a better teacher than I am, I'm still valuable. And so getting to that place of self love, self acceptance, that's what helped me truly overcome because that's the moment when I stopped seeking external validation and
Yes,
I'm
sir.
comfortable in my own skin. And until I got there, it was impossible for me to overcome those issues because they haunted me. They just they were ever present. You know, I needed somebody to say great job. I don't really require that anymore.
That is such a gift when you become comfortable in your own skin. You'll be surprised how many people aren't. You know, I've kind of been just like looking at assessing this generation and how most of them have trouble being by themselves. And if
Yes.
they are by themselves, they can't handle silence. And so that's subconsciously because they're not comfortable in their own skin.
Yep.
So that's interesting thought. I do want to go back to something else in the book. There are a lot of things. Your book looks like a one of those rainbow Bibles used to do back in the day because I've highlighted so much. But but you said something that was also profound. You talked about how watching those television shows you used to watch, it really you knew your mother had value, but seeing those shows made you understand just how much value she really brought to your life and how valuable she was. And I started thinking about fathers. Fathers really teach us. One of the roles of fathers is to teach us how to love our wives and our children. And so until you have that, unless you have that father figure, well, there are always exceptions to the rule. But when there is not a man to tell you how to do that, you have to look for other ways to do that. And so you kind of where the your father was absent, the television or the tube, as we called it back in the day,
Yes.
became, that put your paternal I won't say paternal voice, let's say that.
Okay.
So you really, it's interesting that you had to rely on a show, but there are so many men, so many boys now, they don't have a context of how to love their wives, their sons or their daughters because they've never had nobody to show them. And so they see these images. And so in your case, again, your image was healthy, but so many images now are unhealthy.
Yes.
They call the women out of their name, they're abusive. And so it just is a reminder of how much the absence of a father impacts a child's life,
Yes.
but you were blessed to come out on the other side healthy, which is not is not common today. So I'm encouraged by your story. So I want to ask you, what advice would you give to a young father?
To a young father, I would say, especially one who has not had fatherhood modeled for him,
Mm,
I would say number one, you can never overestimate the importance of your presence.
hmm.
But attached to that or adjacent to that is to properly define presence
Yes, sir.
because it's not just physical. It's not just being in the room. It doesn't matter if I'm in the room if my kid is trying to tell me about their day, but all I see is the game is on. Right?
Mm,
Presence says that the kid is more important than the game. I'm going to turn this off until you finish telling me what you need to tell me. They need to know from you more than anything that they matter,
yeah, yeah,
that there is nothing in this world that has priority above them, their well being, their safety, their voice, their needs. And so you don't have to be a wealthy man to be a good man. You don't
mm,
have to be rich to be a great father.
yes, sir.
You just have to be determined to be just that.
Yes, sir.
And what you don't know, don't be too prideful. I spent many, many years operating from a place of pride where, I had so many wise, capable men around me. but I wouldn't ask for help. Don't be too proud to say, listen, I'm new at this father thing. What can you tell me? What about this? My son came home and told me this. What do you think I should do? You don't have to figure it out all by yourself. You don't have to be a martyr. You don't have to, you know what I mean? You don't have to be the one who says, I'll suck it up. I'll figure it out. I'll do this. Ask for help.
Yes, sir.
Ask for help. I know we're taught that real men don't do that. Yes, they do.
Yes, they
Successful
do.
men sure do.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So in line with what you say, how much value would you place on a father being emotionally present?
Oh man, it's off the scale.
Hmm.
It is literally off the scale. I mean, you can't. It's like, how do you truly, fully address the needs of your child if you are emotionally detached?
Mm. Yeah.
Every issue cannot be addressed logically. It can't just be logic driven. It can't just be logic based. You have to take in the facts of the information and then also interpret the feel of the information.
Wow. Wow.
You got to have both present, right? So you can't, there's a reason why the peace that surpasses all of our understanding guards both our hearts and our minds.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're both in there at all times.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So how does one become develop that skill? Because that's a skill, clearly. How do you
It is
develop that skill?
that's a wonderful question. Um, the word practice seems so it seems so inadequate,
Right.
but there is like this level of intentionality behind it. There is this thing that says, all right, the last time I just kind of heard what they were saying and responded. This time I'm going to listen, I'm going to pause, I'm going to reflect, I'm going to process
Mm.
before I respond, right? Something that simple to kind of build that muscle. It's no different than you and I going to the gym and I want to bench my body weight, but I've never done it before, so I can't just jump right to that.
Right.
So it's this
Right.
thing of just these small incremental steps. What can I do today a little better than how I would have done it yesterday? And so making these spaces, creating these opportunities where number one, your child feels like they can tell you anything, because that's something else that's very important. We have to create an environment that our children come home and say, I always tell my kids, if you make a mistake, the only way I can help you is if you're honest. If you come tell me about it. Please don't let the cops be the first one to tell me. Don't let the principal be the first one to tell me. Don't let your teacher be the first one to
Right.
tell me. Come in and give me a heads up so we can work together to figure this out. But it's on me to make them feel like they can do that. Like
Yeah.
that they're safe with me.
That's the key word. Safe. Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes, many times, and a parent is required to be a disciplinarian. I think if you're not a disciplinarian, you do your child a disservice.
Absolutely.
But I think that there's a difference between being a disciplinarian and a warden.
Yes.
So I think, if your child sees you as a warden, they don't see you as a safe place. They see you as an adversary. And so how do parents navigate creating a relationship that is cohesive versus adversarial?
I think when, especially in terms of discipline, when we make sure we are committed to educating our children more than we are committed to punishing our children,
Mm.
right? So when you do something wrong, it's not about how I can punish you. It's about how I can make you understand that what you did was wrong and why it was wrong. So the consequences come into play because you need to know that that's how the world works. There are consequences to every decision that we make. But more important than the consequences is the understanding,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so even with this book, part of the reason I wrote it is so that people can understand that you see a behavior and it's so easy to instantly identify the what. But the sharing of the story is so that you can stop for a moment and wonder what the why is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not just a kid over here acting up and crying. There's a why behind that.
So true. So true. Wow. Wow. So this is my last question, I think. I think this is my last question. What would you say to the father who is working through his daddy issues? He's now a father, he's now a daddy, but yet he's working through his own daddy issues. What would you say to that person?
Uh, the first thing I would say is that healing is possible.
Mm, mm-hmm.
That healing is possible. I know sometimes we are so conditioned that we feel like this is just what it is, and we resign ourselves to just this is my life, this is my lot, whatever language we choose to use. But the fact is, we all have the ability to change, but it will not happen accidentally.
Yes, sir.
Like we're not going to just kind of trip and fall into change. It is something that we have to commit to. And so it starts with knowing that it's possible, and then it progresses to believing that it's possible for me. And then I can move into what steps do I need to take to make it
Yeah,
actually happen.
it's good stuff.
And
That's
so
good
that's
stuff.
that's kind of where we come to who can I search out? Who can can I find a mentor? Can I find someone who's trustworthy? It may not have been modeled in my home, but who do I remember growing up that I observed even from afar? Is there someone that I can reach out to? I can't stress enough how important it is for us to overcome our own pride and literally reach out for that help. Because our goal, outside of just our personal healing, our goal should be to be the best priest and parent that we can be.
Yeah,
And so if I need help to become that, I got to be willing to ask for it.
right. You talked about it in your book, but I think sometimes people don't ask for help. It's not only pride, but it's also fear of rejection.
Yes, that is true. And that's
Yeah,
something else that we need to overcome.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that is much easier said than done. Let me go ahead and put that out there. I don't want
sir.
people to say people think that I'm kind of, you know,
Right.
underestimating just how daunting of a task. I've lived it. I know
Yeah.
how daunting it is.
Wow. So in this moment, as a man who has overcome and who's overcoming and has navigated through daddy issues and who's walking other people through it, what's something you would share from your heart? Anything you want to share?
Uh, be patient with the process.
Mm,
And that includes being patient with yourself. Because as you grow, as you evolve, as you overcome, it's not always a straight road and it's never a smooth road. There are bumps, there are twists, there are turns. You may take a few steps back. You're going to make some mistakes. Resist the urge to reset to your default settings. Don't go back. You know,
mm,
just because you took two steps back doesn't mean you got to start from go. Start again from just those two steps back. Don't forget the progress that you've made. So if I'm running, and I've already run for 50 yards and something knocks me back 10 yards, I'm not going to run back the other 40 yards to start over again. I'm going to start from the 40 point, right?
yes, sir.
And try to move forward from there. So I think just commit to the process even when it's difficult.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
That's the hard part, man.
It is. It is because, as you said, it's easy to go back to our default settings, because that's our safety net. That's easy to do. How do you avoid doing that, though? I lied. I said I is my last question. I'm sorry.
No, listen, like I said, I think this is a necessary conversation. So fire away. Um, it takes a level of determination. That's one. But I can only speak for myself in this regard. It also takes accountability.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to use this as an example. I made a decision last year that I wanted to be in the best shape of my life. Now, I've been working out by myself for years and have not ever seen the results that I've wanted to see. So last year, I signed on with a personal trainer, and every day I had to, and this was all virtual. To this day, I have not met this man yet,
Wow. Okay.
but every day he sent me my workout routine, and I would have to report back to him honestly if I completed every set and every rep. And if I didn't, where did I fall short? I had to send pictures of my food, whatever I ate that day. I sent pictures because I had to be accountable to my diet as well. And I saw results that I never saw before. And it was all because I made myself accountable to someone who knew what it took for me to get the results that I wanted.
Good stuff. Okay. Okay. So let me ask you this, another question. Are you anybody's accountability partner in terms of, are there people who you provide accountability to?
I absolutely do.
Have any of those relationships been the result of them reading your book?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not
Okay.
yet. These are all pre-existing.
They will though. They will. Man, tell everybody how they can get your book.
So the book is available on online at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and now the ebook version is the Kindle version is available on Amazon as well and on Apple Books. So just search Tim Wortham Jr. Daddy Issues, and you can find them on those three platforms.
And if you're like me, if you like hard copies, I mean hard book covers, he has hard book and soft covers.
Yes.
So that's always a good thing. Man, it is, as I said to you, it is an incredible piece of work. I applaud your courage to share.
Thank you.
I really do. And I'm still reading. I'm not. I'm gonna keep going. But as I told you, I've had to take it in doses because it's heavy. This is not a Dr. Seuss book. This deals with some real. This deals with some real life issues. So I'm gonna ask you to pray as you're led. Pray for those that are watching or anybody else you feel led to pray for.
Absolutely. Gracious God, we thank you so much for this opportunity, for bringing us together. I thank you for Barry and the platform that you have blessed him with, and for his commitment to just helping others. I thank God for the time and the space to share my own story. God, I thank you for all that you have done for me as I've tried my best to navigate my own circumstances. And I pray right now, God, for those who find themselves where I was, who find themselves where I am, who find themselves in totally different circumstances and conditions. Help them to know, God, that there is hope, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that you are that light. I pray, God, for healing to go out to everyone under the sound of my voice, those who will even access this video at a later time, that they might hear something that would encourage them and inspire them and drive them to make the necessary changes so that healing might take place in their lives as well. Lord, I just thank you now because I trust that you're going to do what you do best, which is meet the need of your people. And I just give you all glory, honor, and praise, which is due your name. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Tim, so much. Thank you for powerful prayer. Thank you for your time. Again, thank you for your story. It's powerful. It's going to change lives. I don't want you to think that you're writing. I'm sure you know it, but I want to say it to you. Your writing was not in vain. Your story is not in vain. Everything that you went through is for somebody else. So thank you for not giving up. Thank
I
you for not
appreciate
giving
that.
up on life, but thank you for not giving up on writing, because I know that was painful, a painful process.
Yes,
So
sir.
thank you for your stick-to-itiveness. We appreciate you, and all your future readers are going to appreciate you too, man. To all our viewers, thank you for joining us. Again, please get Tim Wortham Jr.'s book, Daddy Issues. You won't be disappointed. I'm telling you, and it's a page turner. You're going to have to read it in doses, but definitely get it because it's so heavy. Again, Tim, thank you for watching. To all of our viewers, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. We'll do this again on Monday. We have 12 fathers, and we're going to talk again about fatherhood. We're going to talk about the challenges, the charge, and the responsibility of fatherhood. So we'll see you on Monday, November, well, not November. What month is this? Let's try June.
June.
Monday, June the 21st, as we talk to fathers. But for tonight, thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for the pleasure of time, and have a great evening.